Welcome or welcome back, as the case may be, to our podcast, Moorditj Education, where I'm joined by Laurence Fuster. We're on episode 7. Laurence, I really feel like we're in the so-called the Premiership quarter.
It feels like that.
Yeah, I
Definitely
think
feels like
we
that.
really need to kick some goals here to really bring this one home.
Yes.
Our podcast here. Again, maybe we've bitten off a bit more than we can chew, but we're always aiming high.
Always.
And so for this episode, we're going to look at understanding mental health. Now, what a huge area that we will never probably ever understand fully. But where do we begin? Let me ask you, how do you conceptualize mental health? Yeah, what is it for you, and what are the first thoughts that come to your mind?
Well, I think when we look at mental health, it's it's a pandemic. There's so much of it around through the younger generation, through the older generation, and through a lot of people in general. It's such a serious thing that we have to start to tackle and understand more about, especially if we want to really understand ourselves and our minds and where we are within our own mental health. But I think it's important to start to understand it on a deeper level.
Right.
To take it serious, to really understand it. Because for me, in the past, I really struggled with mental health.
Right.
I didn't understand it, but I really struggled with it. And that was, through not really wanting to, or not knowing how to come out the other side of it.
Yeah. So what's your sort of view of what mental health is? Like, what contributes to it?
Well, I think there are a couple things that contribute to it. A lot of things, actually. One of which is through violence, domestic violence. Another is through traumatic experiences, drug abuse, suppression. There are all different types of contributing factors that play into our mental health.
Yes.
One of which, for me, was drug abuse. That was a serious one for me. One of my biggest mental health issues was anxiety.
Right.
Social anxiety in general, not being to have conversations, not believing in myself, and thinking I wasn't good enough, having such low self-esteem.
Right.
And it's a really scary place to be in.
Yes.
Especially when you have to unpack all that. And depending on where you are and how far, how deep you are within your own mental health, it can be very daunting to start to unpack it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're on your own without that support.
Yep.
And that safety net that kind of catches you when you're venturing the other side of it.
Yeah. So for you, did you turn to drugs as a way of coping or masking?
It was
that feelings of.
It was both.
Yeah.
So through drinking, marijuana, then I built high tolerance for cocaine. And I won't lie.
Yeah.
Because it's important to talk about it.
Sure.
And come from a real and genuine space.
Yeah.
But it was a mask, you know, I masked myself through that, through not just the drugs, but through peers as well. Not having a sense of identity,
Right.
not knowing who I was, always trying to fit in,
Yeah.
you know, through the wrong crowds, drinking, drug abuse, and I really lost myself. I lost myself down that path, and at the time, I was unconscious about it. You know, I didn't realize that I was facing and exposing myself to that bad side of mental health.
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Now, you said you lost yourself. Am I to assume that there was a period before that where, you know, you were whole and you knew who you were, and did you fall, or did you lose yourself, or were you always missing something?
I think I was, well, I don't think, I was always missing something.
Right. Yeah.
And I believe that I never knew myself. I never truly knew myself.
Yep.
I thought that, I thought I did,
Yes.
but I never did. And I thought going through that life and, you know, using and putting myself amongst peers that didn't have my best interest at heart.
Yeah.
And I thought by doing that, I could find myself. By doing that, I could be accepted.
Right.
By doing that, I would be, I would find something within myself, some belonging, but I never did.
Yeah.
I was always searching. No, probably not even that. I wasn't even searching, you know, because at the time I was so, stuck, and I was so involved in what I was doing without realizing or thinking about the negative consequences it may have later on down that track with mental health.
Yeah. Now, do you now, looking back, do you perceive some sort of reason or root cause as to why your mental health was not so good at a certain stage? Like, is it just life, you know, just like growing up, or do you feel that other factors contributed to the mental health problems? For example, you know, we were saying in a previous episode that the education experience, you know, through school, that can send you a lot of messages. We're talking about when you get that F, when you get that D. Now, I know it's hard. We're not doctors, so we can't diagnose my mental health issues stemmed from this. But are you able to identify anything that maybe led you to a sense of having low self-esteem, to not really knowing yourself?
I think schooling played a big factor in that.
Right.
You know, not being confident within my schooling, and not feeling accepted, not excelling, and not really being the best in that field. You know, and having that very, very low self-esteem within myself.
Right.
You know, played a massive factor in that.
Yeah, so I imagine, sadly, that there weren't many teachers there kind of, you know, sending you those messages like, Laurence, mate, you're a legend. Well done. You've got a talent there. You've got potential there. Do you think there was a lack of those messages, or?
Yes, there was a lack of those messages.
Yeah.
But at the same time that I kind of gave up.
Right.
I gave up as well. You know, at that time when I wasn't doing the best at something, I gave up within a blink of an eye.
Right.
You know, I gave up and I didn't pursue it again. I dropped it and I never looked back.
Now, at this point, I wanted to ask you. So, you had some, suffering with mental health and struggling with mental health issues. There is a concept in the highfalutin academia, and we say intersectionality. So when different factors collide, they can have disproportionate effects. So I want to ask you, did being an Indigenous man, did that impact at all the mental health?
It did.
Or is it just you being a guy or a man?
I think, being Indigenous played a role in it, especially going to the school that I went to. Me and my brother were the only two Indigenous people there. So it was hard, and we experienced a lot of racism. We experienced a lot of, division. We were black sheeps and we were outcasts, And when you experience that and when you can feel that, it's not a good feeling. It really burns a hole in your heart.
Yeah, right.
And it really plays, it really puts you in a state of sadness and unbelonging and not being accepted and being disregarded, and it really suppressed me. Because wanting to fit in and wanting to be accepted, I think is a big thing for every human, for everybody.
Yeah, of course.
It's that belonging and that interaction. It's that human experience.
Yeah.
We all want to belong. We all want to feel, and we all want to be accepted. But what happens when you're not accepted? What happens when that's taken away? And what happens when you don't feel comfortable in your own environment, in your own learning environment, around your own peers?
And in a previous episode, you mentioned that importance of a safe space.
100%. A safe space is very important to have. It's very important to feel, knowing that you can express and you can be who you are in that kind of environment. To hold a safe space so everybody can feel welcomed and heard.
And one of the words we keep coming back to in this podcast, and I really believe it, we often keep coming back to feeling, to feeling it.
Yes.
Because, those words that you use, it burnt a hole through my heart. Wow, that's really powerful words. That's really, really sad. Now, do you think there is, often we talk, and I'd like other teachers and students to understand, can intergenerational trauma affect people? Like, is that a thing? What form does that take? Because I think it's a difficult concept to understand.
It is. It's a very complex subject to understand. Especially when we're going through intergenerational traumas that stem back years and years and years. That's been handed down from multiple generations of family. And there hasn't been any kind of way where we work through that. And if it's continuing to create those patterns of mental health, and when we're not doing anything to kind of understand it or to break that cycle and to break that pattern and revolving door, it can become very, very bad. You know, you can hand that down to your children and from their children to their children, and the cycle just doesn't stop. And that's the scary part about it, is that the continuation of that cycle.
Yeah. And,
you know?
and what exactly is handed down? What can be handed down, and how can it be handed down?
Well,
is it like stories from parents to children, or is it just the way of being that children see their parents? And
it can be both. It can be the stories, it can be the views and the perspectives, it can be the way that we should see life. That life is scary, don't venture out there. The world is a bad place. There's so much violence, domestic violence. You know, it's okay to hurt women. And it's okay to implement acts of aggression. You know?
So children, grow up with these messages that it's okay to... It's normal. It's normal. It feel, you know...
Especially, you know, disrespecting your family. You know, and that can really... And if that's handed down, the cycle just continues. It continues. And it might just get worse and worse. You know? To what extent does it stop? To where does it stop?
And so stopping it, and, you know, stopping that revolving door, as you were saying, what are some major ways? I understand we've only got a limited time with our episodes, but where do we begin with that, with stopping it? And,
well, it's easier to learn something. It's far harder to unlearn. Especially to unlearn years and generations of trauma, abuse, and psychological suppression. You know, you can imagine if that's been in the family for hundreds of years. That has been constantly handed down. How do you break hundreds of years of trauma?
Well, when it's so normal.
100%. How do you break it? Where do you break that cycle? What teachings must you involve and incorporate to start to change that? Especially when it's been handed down and become such a norm as what you just said. You know, where do we have to sever those lines and ties from the past to the now and onto the future? You know, so it's a very, very difficult concept to understand. It's very complex.
Definitely. And of course, it's a tough call to, you know, a tough task to ask you for the answers. You know, where to begin. But I mean, as our podcast is about education, does education come into it? You know, do we have to do more with children at school or do we need to connect more with families?
I think you know, we have to connect more with families, and depending on where the children are in school, if they've had experiences of hardship through family, and to put them in a space where they can thrive and where they can excel. Because if we put people in just in that academic side without knowing their backgrounds or without knowing if they've got their own mental health issues, you know, it can be very daunting. You know?
So this is another thing I'm hearing a lot from you is you need to be in the right environment.
You have to be in the right environment, but you have to provide that environment. You have to provide that environment. And depending where you are, and what you've experienced and how you've experienced and your own mindsets, it's important to put them, to work with them through that space. You know? How can you get somebody to be a great speaker if they're dealing with social anxiety? How do you do that? You can't expect them to get up. They just won't do it.
That's right,
You know, so it's the same concept.
So really, as you know, as leaders, as teachers, as educators, we need to be providing the space. Providing the environment.
100%.
Providing the resources.
Yes. And we have to get to know. We have to get to know. because we can't provide anything unless we don't know what we're providing for.
Yeah.
You know, so it's very important.
You're also talking about, we were talking before, respecting those with the knowledge, and you have to have been through it. So should we be looking to maybe elders more, or?
I love this this side of learning because somebody that has experienced, mental health and trauma and violence and drug abuse, people that have lived that life and that have experienced that firsthand, and that they're the people that can reach the people that are experiencing that, because they can actually take them through the steps and through a way of recovery where they've done it themselves.
Yes.
But they must have done the work, But if you have done the work and if you have come out of the other side of that, trauma and that mental health and that abuse of substance, and if you have come out the other side of that, and if you're working towards something far greater and wanting to be the best version of yourself, you will truly influence and help somebody where other people can't. And through that life experience, you can take him to places and they feel safe to talk to you because you've experienced that. You've been through what I've been through. You have felt what I've felt. So therefore, I can learn so much about how you've done it and how you have journeyed through the other side.
Yeah, and there's a lot of proof behind what you're saying. It's not just words, because you have demonstrated that within the prison system. You're talking to me about existing programs falling a bit flat because the people teaching them hadn't been through it.
Well, for example, we have these programs in prison systems, for example, where the men or the women go to these courses and these programs that are facilitated by people that have just, for example, come out of uni, or people that haven't experienced the life we've experienced, people that might have degrees and academic backings, but they haven't lived the life we've lived. And they want to teach us on how to change when they have never lived a life that we've lived, and they've never changed in ways where they can help change us. Only someone that has been down that road, that has lived that experience, can help somebody that is living that experience to transition out of the other side, because they know what it's like and they know how to do it because they've done it themselves. So how do we listen to people that have never experienced what we've experienced?
Very
Why
difficult.
would we want to listen?
Why?
I wouldn't want to. They haven't experienced what I've experienced. They haven't lived the streets. They haven't experienced drug abuse. They haven't experienced violence. They don't know that. But then they come in to these industries and in these environments to teach people how to change. That's okay. It's your job, and you have been handed these programs and these teachings from people from the government that haven't done the change either, that haven't experienced what we've experienced. They've made programs through surveys or something, through people's votings and that, but they don't understand the true experience of what we've experienced and what we've encountered, what we've seen and what we've felt, our emotions and what we've had to go through, the hardship we've had to experience. So why would we want to listen? I would prefer to listen to somebody that has been down that route, that has experienced what I've experienced, and that has transitioned out the other side. Because that man does not only provide knowledge, he has provided wisdom
Yes.
and is capable enough to help us to transition out of that.
And it really reminds me of what you're saying about, respecting those different knowledges, like that academic knowledge. You could have done a PhD on intergenerational trauma and mental health and that sort of thing. And, we elevate that person, they're so great. And we often ignore, someone like yourself who is absolutely in the best position to speak about those things and to help people through that.
But you see it. You just see what's real.
Yeah.
You see what we need. You see what isn't working.
Yes.
And what we need to put in place in order for it to be better.
Yep.
And that's what I believe. People that have been down that route have to start to come into that industry and to start to use their lived experience to help others that are experiencing their own forms of suppression, and to help them transition out the other side through their teachings and knowledge and wisdom, how they've done it. But these people must have to have done it. They must be continuing to do it in order to help others achieve that same thing.
Well, that's a really interesting point there that you say. Not only they've been through it, but they're continuing to do it. They're continuing to do the work.
Just because you've done it, you've stopped.
Yeah.
You want to continue to find that growth and to find that pure transition, to have in your mind that you will not be going back to that past life. You will not be going back to that past self. Because you are continuing to go further and to find a greater version.
Yes.
You have experienced that in the past and it has not gotten you anywhere. You didn't enjoy it. You wanted more. You didn't like the peers you were with. You were misguided. You were controlled and you were used. For me, that was a big thing.
Yep.
And people that are experiencing that themselves but are too scared to break the cycle or don't know how to break the cycle, we want to change, but we don't know how to change. That's the hardest thing.
Now, on that note, we want to change, we don't know how to change. So previously we've talked about you've got to do the work. So that sounds like a very, the individual work, but we're also saying you do need that support. So,
you need the support.
So what is it? Like, is it a 50-50 balance? You kind of got to do the work, but also get the support? Or, I don't know, like in the first stage, should you just give more, attention to that person teaching you and maybe let go? Or what's the balance there between doing it yourself, taking the burden on yourself, and like releasing the burden to someone else who might be able to help you?
Well, I think there's two sides of that. Balance is very important.
Yep.
Two sides of burden. We can overburden ourselves.
Yep.
We can put too much burden on ourselves, which causes us to be put in an overwhelming state.
Yep.
We can burden ourselves with what we must do, but we must have a safety plan within ourselves. We must have the right supports. We must have somebody that's leading us and that's helping us to be open-minded, must understand and must provide a safe space through our interactions. Whatever we say, what we do, what we feel, we must be safe to explore that with this person that is helping us to transform and to come out the other side of that. But not to overburden ourselves, we must have that balance.
Yes.
We must understand that it's important to burden ourselves with things that we need to transition to a greater version. But too much burden can cause a state of overwhelmingness.
Yeah, I like how you put that there, burden yourself with what you need to make the transition.
It's the little steps.
And don't maybe exceed that because
Exactly
it'll be too
right.
heavy. The burden will be too heavy.
Well, I know in the past that, you know, I placed so much burden on myself having to, you know, be there for my family, offer supports, you know, but I wasn't doing enough.
Right. You felt you were not doing enough?
I felt I wasn't doing enough.
Okay.
And the things that we've been through and what we've experienced, I felt like I had to take that burden and I had to have the world on my shoulders, which put me in such a massive state of being overwhelmed, which put me in a state of anxiety and not knowing how to unburden these burdens and to understand that you're still so young and someone so young shouldn't have the burden of the world and the burden of life and our experiences and what we've been through, because it was not up to you, you know. But for a young man to experience that burden and not to share those with others and to unpack that can be fucking daunting.
You are an inspiration, mate. I thank you once again for joining me today for episode 7 of Moorditj Education. Needless to say, if you're listening to this, you will not want to miss episodes 8, 9 and 10. I can't wait, and we'll see you there.
Awesome.